are moving faster than we anticipated.
Avanzad con cuidado. Vigilad.
¡Rápido! ¡Moved los caballos!
Are you ready to learn the terrifying truth about the greatest engineering network, which first elevated and then cold-bloodedly destroyed its own creators? This colossal logistical web stretched for many thousands of kilometers, cutting right through the most impassable and rugged mountain ranges on our planet. We are accustomed to marveling at ancient civilizations, but we rarely pause to consider the price they paid for their technological superiority.
Before you lies the story of an incredible triumph of human will, which ultimately turned into a fatal mistake for an entire people.
Ancient builders performed true miracles, literally chiseling through solid rock and fearlessly crossing bottomless gorges without the use of the steel tools we are accustomed to. They knew nothing of wheels or draft animals, yet they managed to create a system of roads that would be the envy of modern highway inspectors. Watch this video all the way to the end, and you'll learn how the greatest achievement of mountain engineers became the main and decisive factor in their rapid and bloody downfall. We'll reveal the secret of why a perfect infrastructure can become the ideal conduit for the destruction and demise of its owner. You will see how the arteries of life, created for protection, were instantly transformed into high-speed highways for invaders bearing death.
This story teaches us that the most powerful instruments of power require not only engineering genius, but also an understanding of the hidden threats they harbor.
What if I told you that everything you believed is a lie? Many consider Roman roads the absolute benchmark of ancient road construction. However, the mountain builders of South America surpassed their European counterparts in the face of incredible elevation changes. They built highways at an altitude of 4,000 meters above sea level. The thin air and harsh climate made every meter of work an incredibly difficult challenge. The builders had no iron chisels to work the incredibly hard rock. They used denser stones to split and polish the basalt blocks. The craftsmen fitted the massive boulders together with unmatched mathematical precision. A knife blade could not fit into the joints between the multi-ton elements of the retaining walls. This monolithic construction ensured incredible stability during frequent and destructive earthquakes. Highways crossed even the driest sandy deserts along the coast. In the sand dunes, massive wooden posts were installed instead of stone.
These landmarks prevented travelers from losing their way during severe sandstorms.
Low adobe walls were erected along the edges of the desert sections. They prevented the route from being quickly buried by shifting ocean sands. The main transportation artery consisted of two long parallel routes. One branch ran straight along the ocean coast through arid plains. The second highway cut through mountain ranges high up in the cold clouds. These two main lines were connected by dozens of important crossroads. The entire territory was transformed into a single, tightly controlled logistical mechanism. Construction was carried out through mandatory labor service for the entire population. Local communities regularly assigned people to work on specific sections. Each group was responsible for its own section of the road and maintained it. The central government provided the builders with food and all necessary materials. This system ensured the continuous expansion of the road network. The road network became the true lifeblood of this vast empire.
It allowed for the control of territories thousands of kilometers away from the capital.
This infrastructure connected vastly different climatic zones and complex landscapes. Mountain engineers created a monumental testament to human will and organizational perseverance. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this engineering approach. Please share your views in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready for the shocking truth? This perfect road network was not intended for ordinary travelers. Only government officials and military units had the right to travel along these mighty stone arteries. Ordinary residents were strictly forbidden from using the highways without special permission from the authorities. Violations of this rule were punished with the utmost severity by local armed guards. Along all approved routes, builders erected an impressive specialized infrastructure. Large fortified inns were situated at a day's journey apart. These stone complexes consisted of sleeping quarters, spacious warehouses, and tall watchtowers. Weary government travelers found there reliable shelter from the elements and fresh food. The state fully and seamlessly ensured the operation of these vital transit points. A unique system of knot writing was used to record complex financial information. These were voluminous bundles of multicolored cords with a multitude of different knots. Each individual knot and color had its own specific meaning, understandable only to trained specialists. Messengers delivered these bundles along with detailed verbal explanations.
In this way, the capital promptly received accurate data on collected taxes and reserves.
The roads ensured incredible mobility for massive army formations. Troops could travel hundreds of kilometers without heavy supply trains. Soldiers received everything they needed from state warehouses along the route. This allowed them to travel light and quickly suppress any uprisings that arose. Speed of movement was the central government's primary and undeniable tactical advantage. Entire new administrative centers were built at the intersections of major highways. These symmetrical cities served as hubs for gathering resources and controlling territories. Spacious, paved squares were designated for holding regular state parades. The stone palaces of appointed rulers towered over the modest dwellings of the service staff.
All the austere architecture underscored the power and immutability of the state system.
This colossal logistical machine ran like a Swiss watch. Vital information flowed through stone arteries to a single decision-making center. Enormous resources were directed precisely where they were most needed. The system seemed eternal and completely invulnerable to any possible external enemies. How effective do you think such large-scale logistics were? In the next chapter, you'll learn how ancient engineers conquered bottomless chasms, a secret passed down from generation to generation. The most difficult natural obstacle for mountain roads was the deep canyons of fast-flowing rivers. It was physically impossible to build reliable stone arches over a chasm tens of meters wide. The ingenious solution was unique suspension structures woven exclusively from local plants. These crossings appeared visually fragile but withstood simply colossal dynamic loads. The main building material was ordinary, tough, high mountain grass growing on the slopes. Local residents collected it in large quantities and carefully dried it in the sun. Then, the grass was carefully pounded with stones to make the stiff fibers soft and pliable. From these prepared fibers, craftsmen wove incredibly thin and strong cords.
The entire preparation process required long and coordinated work by hundreds of people.
The thin grass cords were tightly woven into ropes, which were then transformed into massive cables. The thickness of the main supporting cable could reach the size of a large human torso. Creating a single safe crossing required many kilometers of such strong grass ropes. Their tensile strength was on par with modern steel structures of similar diameter. The entire massive crossing was assembled entirely by hand without the use of lifting mechanisms. Any organic material predictably deteriorated under the influence of moisture and temperature fluctuations. Therefore, each such crossing required regular, extensive, and extremely careful maintenance. Once a year, the surrounding communities gathered to completely replace the entire suspension structure. The old, worn-out bridge was simply cut down, and it instantly fell into the raging mountain river. In its place, a brand new crossing was erected within a few days of intensive work. The complex weaving technique was strictly regulated and constantly monitored by senior craftsmen. Each participating community was responsible for its own specific and clearly defined stage of the work. The slightest deviation from the technique could lead to a sudden collapse and enormous losses. Chief engineers personally checked the tension of every major joint before the official opening to traffic. Strictest safety on such dangerous sections of the highway was always an absolute priority. These flexible, suspended corridors reliably connected the most isolated regions of the vast empire. They allowed long army columns to cross impassable canyons in a matter of hours. Enemy forces could not traverse such gorges without utilizing the existing infrastructure.
Control over key bridges meant complete control over all movement in the mountains.
This was an absolutely ideal strategic advantage over any potential adversary. Grass bridges have forever become a symbol of the brilliant harmony between human ingenuity and the harshness of nature. They convincingly demonstrated that iron was not necessary to build reliable infrastructure. The complex and ingenious weaving ensured the durability of the great empire's transportation network. Please like this video if you were truly impressed by the ingenuity of the ancient builders. What was found in the old archives? In the 16th century, armed troops in metal armor landed on the coast. They brought with them entirely new technologies and tools that changed the rules of warfare. Their total numbers were predictably small compared to the vast army of the mountain rulers. However, the newcomers possessed colossal ambition and an unyielding thirst for rapid conquests. For the first time, the Great Road Network faced a systemic threat of a completely new kind. The newcomers immediately recognized the impressive scale and high quality of the local infrastructure. They quickly realized that the wide stone roads were ideal for their rapid advance. Highways, built solely to consolidate power, suddenly became an effective tool of invasion. The strangers began to move confidently and in an organized manner deep into territory that was completely unknown to them. Straight and level stretches of road allowed the foreigners to easily cover vast distances. They wasted absolutely no time searching for detours or laboriously clearing the jungle. Precise navigation was ensured by the creators themselves, who had laid out optimal routes between key cities. Clear signposts and boundary walls led the organized invaders straight to the wealthy capital. The infrastructure worked incredibly treacherously for its completely new and hostile masters. The speed of the foreigners' advance completely shattered all familiar local defensive strategies. Government troops simply could not regroup in time to launch a powerful counterattack. The reconnaissance network of swift runners functioned reliably, but decision-making centers were catastrophically slow to react. The familiar picture of a predictable world was crumbling before the eyes of experienced local commanders. The roads were bringing the denouement of this unequal conflict too quickly and inevitably. Heavy metal armor glinted blindingly in the sun, striking fear into the hearts of local observers. The sharp sounds of musket fire echoed loudly through the narrow stone gorges. The psychological pressure on the defenders grew with every new kilometer of the stone road they covered. The foreigners climbed higher and higher into the mountains with great confidence, methodically approaching the ruler's residence. The meeting of two completely different civilizations had become an absolutely inevitable historical reality. The infrastructural marvel of the mountains turned into a fatal and unpredictable vulnerability for its ambitious creators. Without these smooth and precisely laid out routes, the foreign detachments would have quickly become bogged down in the impenetrable forests. they would inevitably have gotten lost in the complex labyrinths of rock and quickly run out of necessary supplies. It was the road that ensured their survival and provided incredible tactical maneuverability. The monumental construction project of the past became the most direct path to the Empire's rapid downfall. The complex conflict predictably escalated into a critical phase when armed forces came face to face. Diplomacy was swiftly replaced by aggression and the unexpected capture of key state figures. The balance of power shifted sharply and irrevocably in favor of the few but technically equipped adversaries. Could the mountain rulers have foreseen such a threat? In the next chapter, you will learn how a perfect logistics network became the foreigner's trump card. The sudden capture of the supreme ruler instantly paralyzed the entire rigid system of governance of the vast state. The massive and disciplined army was left without clear strategic orders or a unified central command. The road network continued to function as usual, but now it was running completely in vain. Swift runners carried the terrifying news of an unimaginable catastrophe, sowing chaos in the distant provinces. The invaders had seized the strategic initiative completely and had no intention of letting it slip away. The center of this historic confrontation was a large mountain city with a massive stone plaza. It was there that accumulated wealth from across the empire flowed in an endless stream as a gigantic ransom. Heavy convoys carrying valuables moved in an orderly fashion along the main stone highways from all directions. These massive transports utilized the same state run-ins and reliable bridges. The system blindly and unquestioningly carried out the last desperate order of its noble captive leader. The foreigners began methodically and deliberately to fortify their positions in the captured administrative centers. They effectively used the sturdy stone walls of the old Inca structures for their own reliable defense. The flat highways allowed them to very quickly move small, mobile detachments between the cities under their control. They firmly controlled the key points of the road network, completely blocking the movement of loyal troops. Absolute control of the infrastructure became the main guarantee of their safe survival in a hostile environment. The vast capital opened up before the approaching invaders in all its monumental architectural splendor. Wide, straight avenues led to majestic, towering temples and palaces built of perfectly hewn stone. The complex urban system of water supply and well-functioning sewage deeply impressed the Europeans with its engineering perfection. The vast city surrendered virtually without a fight due to a deep and irreconcilable internal rift among the elites. The capture of this crucial central hub signaled the complete formal collapse of the entire vast empire. The victorious conquerors began systematically and methodically removing valuables from the palaces and temple complexes of the capital. Multi-ton gold architectural elements were torn from the sturdy walls and immediately sent to be melted down. The road network was now intensively used exclusively for the large-scale transport of captured riches to the coast. The perfect logistical machine began operating in reverse, siphoning accumulated resources out of the mountains. The stone transport arteries ultimately became channels of rapid depletion for the once great country. The new, ambitious rulers actively appointed submissive puppet rulers to legitimize their power. They went to great lengths to maintain the full functionality of the entire infrastructure exclusively for their own needs. The intimidated local population was forced to constantly keep the canals clean and promptly repair worn-out bridges. However, the most brutal systematic exploitation and the rapid destruction of the traditional way of life sparked growing, simmering discontent. The illusion of absolute and unshakable control over the harsh mountainous region proved to be extremely short-lived. The general social tension in the ravaged provinces quickly reached a critical point, ready to erupt. The dismantling of sacred symbols and constant harsh extortion finally exhausted the patience of the mountain people. In strict secrecy from the vigilant invaders, a new army of organized resistance began to form rapidly. Swift runners once again carried secret orders along the stone roads, but this time, orders for a full-scale uprising. The historical pendulum of this harsh war was absolutely ready to swing in the opposite direction. Guess what happened next? The appointed puppet ruler suddenly left the controlled capital under the pretext of performing an important ritual. Once in complete safety, he immediately called on the entire nation to launch a massive armed uprising. Huge masses of enraged people quickly responded to this call from their only legitimate leader. The flawlessly functioning road network instantly and silently mobilized hundreds of thousands of armed warriors. The invaders, widely scattered across various distant cities, suddenly found themselves in a deadly strategic trap. Communication between their small garrisons was instantly cut off by the well-coordinated actions of the rebels. The smooth highways that had previously ensured their safety were now teeming with hostile large armies. The well-oiled supply system completely halted all food deliveries to the fortifications seized by the foreigners. For the first time, the foreigners fully experienced the unbearable burden of isolation in the mountains. The capital very quickly found itself in a tight ring of a besieging army numbering in the thousands and determined to prevail. The rebels skillfully occupied all the important commanding heights around the city, completely cutting off the retreat routes. They made the most effective use of the stone terraces as ideal positions for their constant shelling. The captured stone buildings logically became heavily fortified bastions for the defending foreigners. The conflict entered the most severe phase of a brutal positional street battle fought to the point of complete exhaustion. The situation in the tightly besieged capital was becoming truly critical for the small group of exhausted defenders. Their supplies of food and precious ammunition were dwindling inexorably with each day of continuous positional fighting. The rebels deliberately set fire to the dry roofs of buildings, igniting a massive blaze in the very heart of the city. Thick smoke blanketed the streets, effectively concealing the rapid movements of the attacking local units. The besieged found themselves on the very brink of total and unconditional tactical defeat. It was a moment of supreme strategic tension and an absolute turning point in the course of the protracted war. It seemed that the vast empire was fully prepared to throw off the foreign yoke and regain its independence forever. The massive machine of the once powerful mountain state was running at full capacity, pushing back the enemy. The scale of the threat facing the European conquerors was absolutely unprecedented in the entire history of the campaign. Their entire logistics system instantly collapsed under the onslaught of an organized and massive uprising. However, the besieged forces suddenly launched an incredibly desperate counterattack on the rebels' main fortified citadel. This massive and majestic stone fortress loomed menacingly directly over the capital's central streets. Capturing this crucial high ground was the only possible chance to break through the ring of the suffocating and exhausting siege. The assault was accompanied by a colossal strain on the last reserves of strength from both opposing sides. In a grueling and stubborn confrontation, the invaders managed to drive the exhausted defenders out of the key citadel. The fall of this main stronghold dealt a severe blow to the high morale of the massive besieging army. The strategic initiative began once again to slip slowly but surely from the hands of the rightful ruler of the mountains. The tight siege ring faltered noticeably, allowing the exhausted foreigners to catch their breath. Was there any chance to halt this advance? In the next chapter, you will learn how a desperate attempt to destroy their own creation became a defensive line. The massive rebel army was forced to finally lift the siege of the capital and retreat in an orderly fashion. The ruler made the difficult strategic decision to withdraw his loyal troops to the inaccessible, deep, mountainous regions. An incredibly large-scale redeployment of forces began along the remaining sections of the vast road network. Huge masses of loyal people left the fertile, settled valleys, taking all their supplies with them. The strategic retreat required perfect internal coordination and the strictest military discipline. To reliably halt the pursuit, the chief engineers received a shocking order to destroy all the infrastructure they had built. It was a truly unprecedented decision to methodically destroy the hard work of many generations of builders. The craftsmen coolly brought down the smooth stone steps on the steepest mountain switchbacks. They deliberately broke massive retaining walls, triggering artificial and insurmountable rockfalls onto the road. The well-constructed road was to cease to exist forever for the rapidly advancing enemy. Particular and meticulous attention was paid to the complete destruction of suspension bridges across the deepest gorges. Thick grass ropes were cut through in unison with sharp stone axes with incredible and terrifying speed. Huge bridges crashed into the river with a roar, permanently cutting off the shortest routes for pursuit. The invaders approached the very edge of the abyss in confusion and saw only the raging torrent far below. The complete absence of bridges instantly paralyzed the further advance of the enemy's heavily armed units. The ruler quickly established a new fortified state in the jungles, completely inaccessible to Europeans. From there, he skillfully coordinated constant and devastating raids on the rich territories captured by the Europeans. The surviving and experienced runners continued to link remote pockets of resistance via secret mountain trails. They deftly bypassed the completely destroyed highways, using hidden routes known only to the locals. The unceasing guerrilla war systematically drained the limited resources of the new colonial administration. However, the relentless passage of time ultimately favored the technically better equipped and more disciplined enemy. The foreigners very gradually rebuilt the bridges using rougher but highly reliable and familiar technologies. They widened the narrow stone roads to adapt them as much as possible to their increased logistical needs. Local, elegant engineering solutions were ruthlessly replaced by European utilitarian approaches to construction. The main front line moved extremely slowly but steadily deeper into the unconquered mountainous territories. Complete control over key intersections allowed the invaders to effectively fragment the forces of organized resistance. They reliably isolated individual provinces, completely cutting them off from the new center of the mountain uprising. The heavily damaged infrastructure now played a cruel trick on the brave partisans themselves. Without wide roads, they could no longer assemble a large enough army for a decisive strike. Large-scale warfare had finally devolved into a series of local skirmishes and protracted sieges of small fortresses. This final phase of the conflict was marked by the maximum strain on the logistical capabilities of both sides. Every kilometer of road repaired meant another confident step toward the complete conquest of the continent. Every destroyed partisan hideout prolonged the agony of a unique civilization fading into the past. The uncompromising struggle for routes of movement became the very essence of survival in these harsh mountains. The scale of the once unified communications network was inexorably shrinking, contracting around the last stronghold of resistance. The systemic and irreversible crisis was exacerbated by a catastrophic and constant decline in the labor force in the provinces. These sweeping changes completely disrupted the traditional, measured rhythm of life in agricultural communities. Fields remained unplanted en masse, and magnificent stone terraces gradually crumbled without proper care. Granary towers, once filled with first-class food, now stood utterly and eerily empty. Mass starvation began to inexorably sap the strength of both the local submissive population and the partisans themselves. This global and abrupt disruption of the social order led to a demographic catastrophe of a scale never seen before. Entire thriving cities quickly emptied, irrevocably losing their ability to maintain basic and essential infrastructure. There was simply no one left to repair the complex drainage channels or reinforce the leaning retaining walls. Water began to rapidly erode the stone foundations, destroying the perfect geometry of the ancient thoroughfares. Nature was very quickly reclaiming the territories that engineers had fought so hard to win centuries ago. The defenders bravely responded with a hail of stones, but the forces were already catastrophically and hopelessly unequal. The fortress's mighty walls began to crumble rapidly under the constant blows of heavy cast-iron cannonballs. The heroic defense was cracking at the seams, completely unable to withstand the technical pressure of the besiegers. Soon, the invaders' vanguard and armed units stormed into the streets of the ruler's last refuge. Fierce and brief street battles erupted among the low, simple stone buildings. The defenders retreated block by block, rapidly losing control of their own city. The last surviving defenders attempted to take refuge in the jungle, abandoning their useless weapons and meager supplies. Organized and meaningful resistance effectively ceased to exist at this tragic moment. The capture of the very last supreme ruler of the mountains marked the definitive end of a centuries-old era. The political center of the once great civilization was permanently erased from the political map. The few remaining members of the local elite were stripped of their power and forcibly integrated into the colonial system. The state that had built the continent's most sophisticated transportation network vanished from the face of the earth. This engineering marvel could not protect its brilliant creators from a brutal collision with a different reality. The vast and rich territory finally came under the full control of the new overseas administration. The surviving highways, bridges, and inns permanently changed owners and purpose. The invaders immediately began to reorganize the entire logistics system exclusively to meet the needs of large-scale resource extraction. The old, complex routes lost their significance, giving way to entirely new routes to the ocean ports. The unique stone web began to slowly and irreversibly disintegrate into unconnected fragments. The new, harsh colonial economy demanded entirely different logistical solutions and transportation schemes. The administration focused entirely on mining minerals and transporting them to seagoing vessels. The high-altitude cross-country roads connecting remote villages turned out to be of absolutely no use to anyone. Without proper and regular maintenance, these complex sections began to rapidly become overgrown with tropical vegetation. Nature began to mercilessly erase all visible traces of human presence from the mountain slopes. Former state-run inns and warehouses gradually turned into nothing more than picturesque ruins. Heavy stone roofs collapsed, unable to withstand the weight of accumulated earth and roots. Massive walls, built without binding cement, began to crumble rapidly from constant rain and wind. Local residents often dismantled these abandoned structures to build their own modest homes. The infrastructure of a great past had become nothing more than a convenient source of the cheapest building material. Only extremely rare travelers would accidentally stumble upon the monumental smooth walls amidst the trees. The memory of the great builders of the past gradually faded into nothing more than a collection of local legends and myths. The true scale of the vanished civilization became utterly incomprehensible to the continent's new inhabitants. The complete destruction of the unified transportation system quickly led to a colossal cultural fragmentation of the region. Neighboring communities once again found themselves reliably cut off from one another by deep mountain canyons. The mobility that had allowed this vast state to function as a single, powerful entity was lost forever. The high mountains once again became an insurmountable barrier to free human interaction. A brilliant engineering triumph was definitively and irrevocably replaced by absolute logistical collapse. The scale of the work they accomplished boggles the imagination of even the most experienced modern logistics specialists. Creating such a network under the harshest high-altitude conditions without the use of wheeled vehicles seems like pure fantasy. This colossal undertaking required iron discipline and flawless organization of the labor of many millions of people. Their immortal creation outlived the empire itself, becoming a silent witness to a grand historical collapse. Fragments of this gigantic network still amaze with their impeccable geometric precision. The history of mountain stone roads is a vivid and harsh lesson in the duality of any advanced technology. Infrastructure, lovingly created for reliable protection and prosperity, can always be turned against its creators. Perfectly organized logistics accelerate not only the development of the local economy, but also the advance of enemy armies. An unstoppable desire to control vast territories led to the creation of a tool that ruthlessly destroyed those very territories. The outward monumentality of the structure did not in any way guarantee the survival of the entire state. Ancient mountain engineers brilliantly solved problems that seem almost impossible even today. They completely tamed the most challenging mountainous terrain, relying solely on incredible human strength and knowledge of materials. Their remarkable adaptability to the most extreme conditions deserves the deepest and most sincere professional respect. They made no attempt whatsoever to alter the nature of the mountains. Instead, they integrated their paths into the landscape as organically as possible. It was truly a masterpiece of complex ecological and architectural design. Every perfectly level stone step along this long path was paid for with hard physical labor. A strict system of compulsory labor ensured a constant influx of a massive workforce to the construction site for centuries. Without this ruthless centralization, the creation of such a network would have been absolutely and physically impossible. The greatest achievements are very often built on the absolute subordination of the individual to the interests of the state. This is the stark and inescapable reality of any truly large-scale construction project of the past. The speed of information exchange in this system was astonishingly ahead of its time by many centuries. Swift runners provided rulers with a completely uninterrupted flow of the most accurate statistical data. This allowed crises to be prevented instantly and limited resources in the mountains to be allocated as efficiently as possible. The vast country was governed daily at a speed that was incredible for that historical period. This refined communication technology became the strongest foundation of the local elite's political power. However, it was precisely this stunning efficiency that left absolutely no room for a protracted guerrilla war. A technologically equipped enemy brilliantly exploited the well-oiled mechanism of communication and movement for its own tactical purposes. When the system unexpectedly turned against its creators, it struck with the same colossal destructive force. The superior internal organization instantly turned into a fatal vulnerability in the face of an external threat. No local defensive strategy could compensate for this fatal miscalculation. The psychological impact of losing complete control over the highways proved truly devastating for the people. Ordinary people had grown accustomed to the idea that absolute safety came from smooth stone roads and reliable bridges. When those very roads brought death, their worldview collapsed, permanently paralyzing their will to resist. The sudden infrastructure shock broke the fighting spirit of the local population faster than the foreigners' steel weapons. It was a veritable catastrophe of the familiar systemic perception of reality. As a result, the civilization of these brilliant builders suffered a crushing historical defeat in the clash of eras. Their collective engineering genius could not compensate for the lack of firearms and metallurgy. A complex and well-functioning social organization proved utterly powerless against the onslaught of a technically equipped minority. The monolithic stone walls fell not because of frequent earthquakes, but because of their inability to withstand a new type of warfare. This is a harsh and indisputable historical fact, without the slightest embellishment or sentimentality. The well-preserved ruins of the Great Road Network continue to defy time and the elements. The surviving sections of this mountain highway are rightly recognized as the greatest architectural achievement in world history. Modern scholars are still trying to decipher the logic behind the routing of paths through dangerous mountain passes. Every fragment of masonry found in the jungle constantly reveals new details of this colossal project. The unique legacy of the ancient masters continues to live silently within the cold stone. The tragedy of a vast empire of mountain engineers is forever frozen in the smooth basalt slabs of these roads. That grandiose path, which was supposed to lead to eternal power, led the entire civilization to ruin. It is simply a stunning historical tableau, where the grandeur of the human mind coexists with the inevitability of collapse. The perfect lines of the long stone roads remain a monument to ambitions trampled by the relentless march of time. The cold wind continues to roam freely through the empty inns, carrying away the memory of great campaigns. This road network has convincingly proven that true national greatness is measured by more than just gold. This vast and complex logistical mechanism stands as the pinnacle of organizational thought for an entire vanished culture. It clearly demonstrates the limits of human society deprived of the modern technologies we are accustomed to. All this monumental work predictably ended in total defeat, leaving behind only stones. The immense scale of their incredible triumph is matched only by the scale of their final tragedy. What lessons do you think modern engineers can learn from this story of technological collapse? Suggest topics in the comments for future historical and architectural analyses that you'd like to see on our channel. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss new large-scale historical chronicles and analyses of ancient logistics.